One of the greatest beauties of arts is that we are naturally inclined to step beyond the boundaries.
This was the situation we were all in, like it or not. Everything collapsed altogether. You lived and you worked in the same space.
Besides the pandemic, they probably had so many issues going on in their lives, and then they had this pandemic thrown on top of them. So many families got coronavirus, people died, people were in the hospital.
A lot of people are isolated, and they were isolated, and they felt isolated.
I also understood and had that experience myself after a while with your hair and your image. Seeing students physically look different because they gained weight. You want to present yourself to the world when you walk outside the way you want to. And when you take all of those factors out, you're left with this lack of control.
What happens with all these additional pressures of trying to keep that up while facing loss, sickness, the tension of the racial issues in our country, the political situations? Is this really important? This pushing for what? For an A when there's so much going on in the world.
As a teacher, when everything about your bones, everything inside you says that we need to be together, you just feel like you're a failure because you can't do it, because you don't know how to do it.
This should not be a time where you stop and go, I can't do anything. You should be going, all right, how do I come out of this better than when I went in?
I can hear you. Your voice is a frequency, just as if you're on a stage and you have an audience. We can connect. Listen to a sound in your environment and mimic that with your mouth. What's a low vibration emotion right now that you feel and you don't want to feel? Technology glitches. Do you hear a potential beat in that? Can you mimic that rhythm pattern through beatboxing? Play with the obstacles so that we're not stopped and shut down in our artistic expression and our opportunity.
We went over things like in the house. Cardboard box is awesome. You could just cut it open. You could paint on that. You could draw on that. A paper bag. Whatever you have. You move forward into this alternate reality that you're creating for yourself. It's like this little spark or ember, and it resonates and starts growing and growing. Like dancing when you're moving your body and you're just getting lost in everything. Like your true self coming out.
What happened during this pandemic is that when people were shut up into spaces, there was a drive for wanting to create. If we're not producing something, there's something inside of us that's going, then what am I here for? Why do I exist?
Don't you forget, the only thing that matters is our heartbeats going strong.
What the pandemic taught the students more than anything is that they are the driving force. They're the medium, they are everything. Because it's really about the blossoming, isn't it? Isn't it, when you're working with students and working with people, isn't it about the blossoming of their growth, not just of the art, but of what they're doing and who they are? When they own it, it's valuable. When they create it, it's valuable. It doesn't have to be the best they've ever done, it just has to be honest. That's when we get to that point where we're like, ah, there's that rose. There's that rose in the weeds.
We always have a choice of how we respond to the crisis. That's what arts does. It gives them the voice.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Student Empowerment Through SEL in Music Education webinar series. My name is Rebecca Hoff from Save the Music Foundation. Save the Music is proud to partner with the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning to produce this free series. Thank you all for being here with us today. We believe when social emotional learning is embedded into music education, students learn the skills that will help them confront life's complexities and challenges long after they leave the music classroom. Throughout our webinar series, we will feature guest experts on different topics in SEL and music. Today, we are unlocking the potential SEL has to deepen our musical connection with students and amplifying student agency in our classrooms, schools, and communities. The video during our pre-show, Beyond the Boundaries, Arts Education Through a Pandemic, is a short documentary created to celebrate the resiliency of both our arts students and arts educators. It's a fitting way to kick off our series, as this session is happening during Arts in Education Week being celebrated across the country. Lastly, this work was made possible through the support of KKR COVID Response Fund, a sponsored project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We thank them for their generosity. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Bob Morrison, Executive Director of the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Morrison, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning. And we're so incredibly excited to partner with Save the Music on this special 9-part series, Student Empowerment Through Social Emotional Learning in Music Education. Tonight, we kick off the series with our focus on connecting music education and social emotional learning with our very special guest, Dr. Pamela Randall from Castle. And later, we're going to be joined by Kira Rizzuto, our center's Director of Programs and Partnerships, as well as Yarel Lashley, our Director of Student Empowerment, who will be hosting upcoming episodes in this series. And now, I'd like to bring on Dr. Scott Egger. He is our center's Director of Practice and Research and has been one of the brains behind the development of this series to tell us more about the series and what you can expect. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much. I want to stress before we even get into this is that this entire webinar series is the result of a relationship. It's about a relationship between Save the Music and the folks who have been working on this at the center. And how true is that for these first few weeks of the semester? That if something is going to really happen well and meaningfully, it's going to be because of a relationship. And that relationship is going to bring us to a space of having 9 fantastic webinars. We're going to start connecting the dots between different areas of music education, and social and emotional learning. Some of it's going to be digging into the weeds, and some of it is going to be speaking universally so that everyone can understand what this is. We're going to be looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion, developing a sense of belonging, neurodiversity in music education, culturally relevant pedagogy, and how that relates to social and emotional learning in music education. And then we're going to explore different genres within music. We're going to look at the traditional orchestral setting and how does that look when we start to really dig deeply into social and emotional learning and meeting our individual students' needs. We're going to look at hip hop. And then in the end, we're going to look in our culminating episodes about how do we truly embrace student empowerment and amplify student agency. So just to whet your appetite just a little bit, some of the folks who will be joining us on future episodes include not only today's just unbelievable Dr. Pamela Randall, but in the future you'll be able to see Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, Dr. Alice Hamill, Franklin Willis, Alicia Lee, and Mickey Smith Jr., among many, many others. So all I have to say is stay tuned because there's going to be some big, big announcements for the folks who are going to be on this webinar series. Thanks so much, Bob.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Now, I could not be more excited to introduce our inaugural guest for this series. She is the Senior Staff Advisor for Castle, the collaborative for social emotional learning out of Chicago, where she's been on staff since September of 2021, so for more than a decade. But before that, she was a school improvement officer for high schools in the Houston Independent School District, where she was responsible for supervising and coaching principals to create high-quality teams and programs focused on student academic growth. She also served as an instructional officer and deputy chief officer for the Office of High School Programs of the Chicago Public Schools, where she was responsible for the city's high school programs. And previously, she was the interim superintendent for St. Louis Public Schools, where she served as deputy superintendent and executive director of secondary education. She also was a principal at the Metro Academic and Classical High School in St. Louis, which at the time was the highest performing high school in the state. She holds a doctorate in education administration from St. Louis University, a master's degree in education administration from Southern Illinois University, and most importantly, she completed her bachelor's degree in dance education at the University of Illinois, where she was an honors graduate. She began her career in education as a high school dance teacher in University City, Missouri. In other words, Pamela's one of us. That's why I was so excited to have her join us this evening, and I want you to please welcome me in welcoming Dr. Pamela Randall.
Bob, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with what I consider to be friends now, more than colleagues. I want to thank the Center for Arts Education and Social and Emotional Learning and the Save the Music Foundation for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. And I want to just take you back 30 plus years ago when I was a professional dancer. And this is me. If you look to the right of the screen, I was in the dancing chorus at the Muni Opera for many seasons. And so I feel like I've been an artist before I was an educator, before I was a high school principal, before any of that. I was always an artist at heart. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. So I've been invited to talk about CASEL. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. We're headquartered here in Chicago. I've been with CASEL for, as you heard, 10 years. And CASEL was the field builder starting way back in 1994, where we really started to focus on social and emotional learning. We have been focused on advancing the science of SEL through the research that started in 1994. We've also been a critical partner in terms of policy development and support with legislators, with policymakers across the country to make sure there are supports there for SEL. And we've also, in the last 2 years, been working with practitioners directly around the practice of SEL, what actually happens in the classroom. So I'm happy to be part of this discussion tonight. Look forward to the conversation of how SEL and the arts really is an essential part of every child's, should be an essential part of every child's education. We've been working with 22 plus districts actually for the past few years, but this work started in 2011 with just 3 districts. But as you see on the map, we're across the country. We're even getting more interest from countries around the world. And so this SEL movement is really taking hold. We're finding traction, like I said, not only in the country, but across the world. It's really becoming a global movement, and we're so happy to be part of this advancement of SEL. I want to show you now a video. It's our safe and supportive learning environments. It's a high-level overview of why we feel SEL is so important and it should be an integral part of every child's education. So it's just a short video. We'll just start it now. It's just a couple of minutes long.
We promise to
be respectful,
be respectful,
be responsible,
be responsible,
be safe,
and
be ready to learn.
And be ready to learn. Yes.
It's really exciting to be at a time in the social and emotional learning movement where we have not only the evidence to undergird the work, but we have practical implementation models that make it possible for districts to actually start.
We've done the groundwork of good things that can happen in the classroom, good things that can happen in the school, good things that can happen in the community, good things that can happen at the district level. We're at an inflection point.
The idea is to leverage SEL in order to help young people realize those talents and thereby help the broader society and in fact the world.
Over the last few years, we've seen a massive increase in the number of people who know they want it. This is a moment.
90% of parents, 90% of teachers, principals who say they want more, that social emotional learning is important, they want more of it, they want training in it, they want to prioritize it.
The exponential growth of social and emotional learning isn't just happening in the US. We're seeing its growth across the world in countries including China, Russia, all of the European Union, Australia, and many others who are now embracing social and emotional learning.
We're saying to people, try something new. Believe in your kids. Believe that they are ready to learn if you just help them unlock their hearts, find belonging in their relationships, and find purpose in the content of which you're trying to teach them.
If you ask me how I feel about this now, I'm absolutely amazed at the impact we're having.
We are absolutely in a moment where this can really happen. We really can create schools that inspire, that help students find their sense of self, that help students find their sense of purpose, to learn how to relate to one another, and to better prepare kids for wherever they choose to go in life.
So let's get into the grounding. Why are we doing this? Why is SEL so important? We just recently, in the last year, updated our SEL definition so that it becomes more grounded in the equity needs of our students. We've always known that SEL was important, but we also realized that SEL needs to be in service of creating equitable learning environments. So I'm just going to quickly read our updated SEL definition. Social and emotional learning, as we know, is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, to feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible decisions. This is the new part that we added in the past year. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. So hopefully the 5 competencies, the wheel in the center of this diagram, of this framework, looks familiar to you. We've been talking about self-awareness, the 5 competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making for the past 26 years. We've also started the conversations about where is SEL actually happening? What are the contexts that we need to consider when we're teaching these 5 competencies, when we're teaching these skills? So we started having conversations around the importance of the 5 competencies showing up in the classroom, in our schools, in our school policies, and in culture and climate, in the families and caregiver spaces, and also in the broader communities where we have partners at the table working with us. So not only are we talking specifically about the 5 competencies, but we're also talking about the importance of the context in which we're teaching these competencies. So let's dig into the competencies briefly. What do we mean by self-awareness? We're talking about the ability to identify and understand your emotions, your thoughts, to be demonstrating honesty and integrity, having a growth mindset, having some sense of efficacy. When we talk about self-management, being able to manage your emotions, being able to set personal and collective goals, demonstrating personal and collective agency. Social awareness, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, taking on others' perspectives. Also being able to identify diverse social norms, including the unjust ones, and to be able to call those out. Recognizing situations that demand opportunities and access. So being aware of the social impacts that we're having in our classrooms and in our communities. relationship skills, being able to establish and maintain those healthy, positive relationships, to be able to effectively navigate the settings with diverse individuals, thinking about how we're communicating, hopefully effectively with our teams, with our family members, with our peers, being able to stand up, being an upstander, standing up for the rights of others, practicing teamwork and collaboration and problem solving. And when we think about responsible decision-making, making caring and constructive choices that are going to affect not only us personally, but collectively, being able to be curious and having an open mind about what you're learning, the people that you're meeting, recognizing how critical thinking skills are useful both inside and outside the school, and reflecting on your own role of how you're promoting personal, family, and community well-being. It's not just about what is benefiting me, but how are my decisions affecting the full community? So again, when we started talking about the competencies, we understood the importance of schools taking consideration what's happening in the classroom. As a teacher, how am I welcoming students into my class every day? How am I making them feel like their culture matters, that we want to learn more about each other's culture? How are we in the schools creating policies that are going to continue to engage students, to help them understand that they are important to this community, that we're hoping that they will be there to thrive? How are we supporting them and providing opportunity and access in the schools? How are we welcoming families and parents and caregivers into our schools to make sure that they understand they're an important part of the planning process, of the implementation process in the school? And how are we expanding the SEL work so that the full community can really support the work that we're trying to do in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our school districts? So, in thinking about what's happening, we get this question all of the time with folks when we talk about the SEL competencies and the context. We say, well, what does it really look like in practical terms? So we created the 10 indicators of school-wide SEL. You could advance, please. And here's what we're talking about specifically: having explicit instruction, SEL instruction, with an evidence-based program, making sure that students feel like their voices matter, that they're engaged in the decision-making process, that they have a place at the table. We really focus on adult SEL, making sure that we understand that before the adults can impact students' lives through SEL instruction, they themselves have to understand that they're constantly honing and improving, hopefully, on their SEL competencies. It makes me think of a story when we started this work in Chicago Public Schools back in 2011. The principal stopped us and said, wait a minute, before we even think that we're going to have any kind of impact on our kiddos, we've got to make sure that we are taking in consideration the adult competency development. And so that was a pivot point for CASEL. We started understanding that this is a parallel track, that adults, just like students, are constantly working on their skill development in these 5 competencies. So again, having authentic family partnerships, having a cycle of continuous improvement. These 10 indicators of what we need specifically when we're talking about systemic SEL in schools, in districts, and in communities. And this is our theory of action. You've seen the will in the center. That's the what and the where. The why, we have plenty of research that shows that when you have a high quality SEL environment, there's less disruption in the school, there's less risky behavior. Students talk about having a full connection to schools, less risky behavior in terms of drug abuse or other risky behaviors. There are longitudinal studies to show that when there's a high quality environment from pre-kindergarten through graduation, those students fare better in terms of their post-secondary education, their careers, the personal decisions that they're making about their personal lives. But how? How do we do it? So on the left is our theory of action. We have these 4 focus areas. First, making sure that you're establishing a foundation of support and planning for the SEL that you hope to see in your school and in your district. Again, strengthening the adult SEL in terms of competency development and capacity building. And of course, promoting SEL for students on a daily basis in all aspects of the school day, from the time they get on the bus, from the time they are entering the music studio, from the time they're leaving the dance studio, when they're in the playground, in the cafeteria. And then also making sure that you're reflecting on what's working and what's not. What do we need to pivot? What do we need to leverage? So making sure that you have that continuous improvement cycle happening. And as music educators, as arts educators, and again, I got this information directly from the Center and the New Jersey Arts Framework that has been so helpful to Castle and to our Castle community. Here are just some arts process questions that I encourage you to consider as you're beginning to plan arts or music lessons. You also have a wonderful new resource through the Student Empowerment through SEL and Music Education Guide. Lots of information there that talks about the importance of SEL being an integral part of education, just as the arts should be. And so a lot of this information is coming from those resources as well. Just some questions to consider as you're beginning to plan for your arts lessons. And then lastly, what happens as the students are creating these art, dances, compositions, visual arts, portraits and paintings? What are the questions that you want those students to come away with? So here are some reflection questions that we feel are high quality questions for the students to really reflect on the experience that they've had and what they're learning and what they hope to impart on the audience or the person that's seeing the artwork. So again, just some reflection questions for you to consider. Here are some of the resources that we've been using. These are all linked in the information that you have. Of course, the 5 competencies, the indicators of school-wide SEL, the personal self-reflection that I encourage as adults that you consider. This tells you a lot about the areas that you're strong in terms of your SEL development and maybe some areas for growth for you. So I strongly encourage that you consider the self-reflection. And then also a study that was done by the Chicago Consortium of School Research. Another great resource for when you're thinking about creating lessons or modules for learning in arts and SEL. And of course, the frameworks that I spoke of from the National Standards for Arts Education through Arts at New Jersey. And with that, I hope that has been a high-level overview of what we're meaning when we talk about high-quality SEL and the arts environment. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Pamela. And I know that, that is a lot of information that we covered in a short amount of time. But everything that that Pamela talked about, her presentation deck, as well as a lot of the resources that she just referenced, are all in the Google Drive that we have set up. We dropped the link into the chat here, so you can go right there, see all the resources that we're talking about here, as well as a session deck that Pamela has pulled together. So everything's right there. What I'd like to do now is bring Dr. Scott Edgar back to join us for this part of the discussion. But before we get into our conversation with Pamela, Scott is going to walk you through a new resource that we've just created for this series that we're releasing with this webinar that will become a really important and valuable resource for you. So Scott, why don't you share with them what we've cooked up?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. Pamela, as I was watching that video, I was starting to well up a little bit. The videos with Roger Weisberg, Dr. Weisberg, as part of that, it was just so touching to see his presence there. And we'll see this at the end, but we're dedicating this episode to one of the founders of Castle, Dr. Roger Weisberg, who we unfortunately lost very recently. As part of this process, as Bob mentioned, we have just had the honor of being able to produce more resources. And I think that's what teachers are looking for more than anything. It's just, what's step one? If you really want me to do this, what is step one? And I see Dave Fry just put it into the chat that the reflection process is front and center. So I'm so incredibly excited to share with you our brand new reflection guide through the Student Empowerment through SEL and Music Education series. And if we take just a quick look at this, it starts exactly where Pamela just took us, into this area of social and emotional learning. Each area of this is divided into guiding principles. Just what is this? And then how do we specifically look at this through the lens that we're encouraging people to think through? And then what are some tangible teacher reflection questions? As Pamela just so beautifully said, it starts with adult SEL. So what are those questions that we need to ponder before we even get into the classroom? And then some spaces for us to start to think about how do we engage our students? And it's very, very important for us to realize that all of these reflection questions are aiming for middle of the road. And the key word that I want in your head is adapt, adapt, adapt. I've never seen many of you, if any of you teach, and I've never met any of your students. So we need to think about, how do these questions manifest in your space? How do we tweak that question for kindergartners? How do we ramp up that question for high school? Those are the questions that we understand. SEL is not a one-size-fits-all box that we put students or teachers in. It's a space that we engage. So then we started to explore, what does it look like in the music classroom? How do we explore this idea of identity, belonging, and agency? How we're adapting those Castle 5 pillars to really understand what it looks like in our music classroom. And then our mantra here at the center is that for SEL to be impactful, it needs to be embedded into the music content. It can never be music, 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 stop. It's SEL time, music, music, music. It needs to be musical SEL and feel organic in our space. It needs to be intentional, that we need to approach this with intentionality to say that we are building life skills right along with the musical aptitude. And then finally, it needs to be sustained. It can't be SEL Fridays. It needs to be part of everything that we do. And we've gone through then, and we've looked at what this looks like from an identity perspective. How does that idea of self-awareness and self-management work into how we're building identity development? Who are our students? Who are we? And how does that filter into the decisions that we're making now and our beliefs that we're making now? This sense of belonging. Music necessitates vulnerability. We have to put ourselves into the space. There's no hiding in our classrooms. We know this. But for that to be effective, it needs to have trust, and we need to have this sense of belonging. Again, teacher reflection questions, student reflection questions, what is it, guiding principles. And then finally, this idea of agency. How can our students' voices affect meaningful change in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our communities? And we firmly believe that the music classroom is the space for students to begin to explore and understand that their voice does matter. And to do this, as Pamela graciously nodded to, as part of ArtsEd New Jersey's work, we've built the framework for arts education and social and emotional learning, where we've built a idea where we've taken all of the social and emotional learning standards, and we've taken all of the National Core Arts standards, and we've crosswalked them. So we can look at what are the artistic processes, what are those arts anchor standards that we're after, and then what is the SEL competency? And if we were to take a look, if we were to go to selarts.org, you would see that it provides a beautiful framework for us to better understand. And to be honest, as much as we really hope that you get so much out of these next 9 webinars, there's always going to be more. This is going to be the tip of the iceberg. So where do we go next? This last page helps us understand exactly what are some other resources. And, people say, Scott, I want to learn more. And this is a question, Pamela, it's coming to you in just a second when we start to get to this point, is how do we get beyond the classroom? What are the steps that we need to take to build community? And at the center, we believe that professional learning communities and fine arts teams are the perfect place to start to develop this identity, belonging, and agency.
Great. So now we're going to go into a little bit of a discussion with Pamela for the next few minutes. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to drop the questions into the Q&A panel. And we'll be answering them as we go, as well as we'll have a dedicated time just for your questions. So with that, I'll start with Pamela, as someone who's, your experience was as an artist and an arts educator. How did you come to understand the powerful connection between the arts and social emotional learning through your work?
Again, I've been with Castle for 10 years, but I feel like it really rung true for me as a dance teacher, both at my alma mater. I taught dance at my high school where I graduated, and I also taught for 15 years in St. Louis public schools. But understanding, even before we had language, the SEL language, understanding the need, first of all, for building community for those students, as Scott said, feeling like they can be vulnerable, that there's a certain level of trust in my classroom, that if they make a mistake, everyone is there to support them. If they achieve greatness, everyone is there to support them. So really thinking about communicating and making sure that it was an organic feeling of this is a safe space for us to learn, to make mistakes, to thrive. And I think that was, I know that that was part of my my ethos as a early dance teacher in my early 20s, and then becoming a principal, same idea. I was a high school principal of a small high school in St. Louis, and we made it, it was a requirement of the staff to make sure that those students knew that they were our babies, in a sense, that we were going to make sure that everything we did was in service to them. So again, making sure that they had a seat at the table to make decisions about how the school was going to be operated, how we were going to invite their parents in and community members in to really make Metro High School a thriving community. And that comes through consistency, community building, trust building, problem solving, all of those things that you would hope to have in your home, in your school, in your community. That was the mantra for us at Metro High School. And again, as I advanced into other positions, it was that same kind of understanding that we must first and foremost make the space safe for vulnerability, for learning, for mistakes to happen, for successes to be celebrated.
Excellent, thank you. Scott?
Pamela, thank you so much for being here. Just let me just think from my perspective. A lot of the work that I'm doing, I'm talking to teachers, but I'm also talking to administrators. And I know that you, as you just said, as your role as an administrator, we have so many teachers right now who are out there and just saying, you know, I'm burned out. I don't have fuel in the tank. You're asking me to do SEL. That feels like one more thing. And a lot of that, I feel, comes from the culture of both music and the arts, but also culture that we see in education. So I would like just to pick your brain for a second about how do you feel that key component of adult SEL can help us combat some of the burnout that some of our music teachers watching are feeling?
Yeah, I think we've all realized, especially in this past year, and I know this is now becoming like we're beating a drum here that we've all like, let's get past it, but COVID, the pandemic has taught us that self-care is so critically important. It was important prior to the pandemic, but it's especially critically important now. So before I can give myself to a student or to my staff or to my district, I've got to make sure that I'm okay first. So really, and I mentioned this in the presentation, that personal self-reflection, that SEL reflection, I took it as a new member of Castle. I strongly encourage that it takes 20 minutes, if that long, to go through those competencies and to learn, oh, I'm really strong in self-awareness, but I really have a lot to learn in terms of my relationship building skills or my responsible decision-making skills. That personal self-assessment really put me on the right track of knowing where I wanted to leverage my growth or my strengths, and then where were the growth areas for me so that I could really hone those skills. So I would start there. I would take that personal assessment so that I'm having a better understanding of who I am as an adult, how am I presenting and showing up in my classroom, and then having honest conversations with your students. I mean, as a principal, I would get on the PA sometimes and say, you know what, folks, I screwed up today, and this is what I did, and I apologize, and this is what I need to do a better job as your principal or as your leader. So being vulnerable so that your students get to see that this is a lifelong journey. I'm on this journey with you, and that we're going to improve, but sometimes we're going to mess up, and we acknowledge those mess ups and we apologize and we move forward. So being as vulnerable and as real with your students as possible, I think that's the best way. And once they see you modeling that for them in the classroom or in the school or in the district, then they'll say, oh, you know what? It's okay if I had a misstep. Dr. Randall had a misstep and she was able to acknowledge it, and she was able to hopefully create a course of correction to improve. So I think just being real and as organic and as authentic as you can in your settings is the best advice I can give teachers and administrators.
Pamela, I love that because it takes so much pressure off of us because we feel like we're on stage and we have to be perfect and we can't make mistakes. And that's setting our students up for a similar mindset. And so thank you for saying that.
You know, that reminds me, I just a recent experience this Saturday night, went to local performing arts center. Audra McDonald did her first performance in 18 months. And everyone was following mitigation. But, you know, like everything, she hasn't performed live in 18 months. You know, and she came out as three-dimensional people. And one of the things that was interesting was that, you know, there were some cobwebs that they had to shake off in doing it. And just the emotion of it being the first opportunity out, but then the vulnerability that she showed, and then the way the audience embraced her in that vulnerability was just amazing. It was amazing to see with someone at that level in this kind of environment. You know, so I think that's a great example of that. Now, what I'd like to do is bring in our other facilitators who will be involved in facilitating different episodes for the series. I'd like to bring in Kira Rizzuto, who is our Director of Programs and Partnerships, and Urel Lashley, who is our Director of Student Empowerment, and welcome them to this conversation. Kira, Urel, how are you?
We are well. I am well. I can't speak for Kira.
You can speak for me in that regard too. I am well. It's been a pleasure listening to Dr. Randall and you know, just seeing how this series got its start.
Absolutely. I also wanted to say good evening to everyone who tuned in. Dr. Randall, thanks so much for being here, and also thanks for just giving us a solid overview of SEL priorities, focuses, outcomes, both in theory and in practice. And so I guess since we're really focusing this evening on student empowerment, I wanted to elevate the student reflection questions you shared. I think it was slide 17 of the presentation, which includes questions like, what did you learn about factors that influence how artists create new work? How did you feel while practicing, rehearsing, and performing the artwork? Sort of, how did you channel your emotions into your work or performance? And how can you apply what you learned in this experience to life? These are obviously questions that are geared to help young folks start to think intentionally and understand exactly what's happening through the art process. So I'm wondering, with those questions as sort of a point of reflection, are there key practices that you'd recommend specifically to music educators as they set out to use these sorts of questions to empower students? Like how might we integrate regular routines around them, for example, into sort of our teaching practices? And then are there examples that you can share from the field in your experience?
Sure. We have something called the 3 signature practices. And in terms of thinking about routines that you want to set up, these are not just for music educators. We offer these for superintendents. We offer these for principals, for parents, anyone. Here's a simple something you can do tomorrow to start building that community so that students can understand their identities and build positive identities, to have that sense of belonging in the classroom, and to be agentic, to know that I have a voice in how I want to be taught. So one of the things, the 3 signature practices, the first thing that you're going to do is that you're going to set up some welcoming rituals. As those students are coming in, as they're getting their music, instruments out of their cases, it could be something as simple as, what was the last thing, as they're preparing for class, what was the last piece of music that you listened to that really moved you? Or what was something that you totally didn't agree with? So that could be just a a question on the board that students are going to reflect on as they're coming into the classroom and getting settled into their band seats. And then asking students to share out loud before you actually get into the lesson, just briefly. It could be as, a minute or two, but just knowing that there's going to be some kind of starter to that lesson that's going to welcome them in. And it's not a threatening question. It's something that any student can answer. So having that warm welcome into that classroom is the first part of this ritual, if you will. And then having some type of engaging practice throughout the lesson, whether it could be, okay, we're going to pause here and the three of you are going to go over and talk about these 8 bars of music. How does that make you feel? Are you worried about it? I remember I was playing piano and flute. There were, certain parts of the piece that would always freak me out, or certain parts of the music that would always calm me or soothe me. So having them go and discuss, having some type of engaging discussion about the piece of music that they're practicing or learning. And then having an optimistic closure, ending every class with something that's going to send those students off excited about the music, excited about the piece that they're learning or composing. So again, the 3 signature practices can happen in any setting. We have the superintendent in Minneapolis. He starts every meeting with he implements the 3 signature practices in every meeting that he has. So these are things that doesn't take a lot of training. It's something that you can do tomorrow and it doesn't cost anything. Having those kind of rituals in place is a good start to start building that community.
Thanks so much for the rituals, and also just the specificity, because we know now that more and more folks are attuned to and talking about SEL, and now the work really is sort of what does actual implementation look like, and sort of how does the rubber meet the road. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and just another thing, as it's stated in the guide that you all have, and by the way, we absolutely love the student empowerment through SEL and Music Guide. I'm sending it out like as we speak. It's a wonderful resource. But making sure that we understand that SEL really needs to be integrated into every aspect of the school day, into the music lessons, into how you line up the students to come into the classroom, how they get off the bus. There's no space that doesn't require solid SEL. SEL, we feel like it's the foundation. When I hear Scott or others or Bob talking about teachers feeling like, oh, it's one more thing. No, it's not. It's the plate. Before you can teach chemistry, before you can teach the ballet class, you need to establish, we strongly suggest that you establish this foundation of community, of safety, of this is where we learn, here's how we're going to support you in learning. Those are SEL skills that are the foundation. So it's not one more thing. It's not one more thing on your plate. It is the plate.
Nice. Thank you.
It's always so wonderful to have the opportunity for you to share your personal experiences, Dr. Randall, because you're so candid. And I think that really does help us to learn from what you share. What does this look like? We talk often, sometimes the definitions are what we lead with, but I have had a number of opportunities now to listen to you describe what it looks like. So for example, when we talk about literacy and fluency through developing artistic literacy and fluency, or in this case, musical literacy and fluency, we might learn from you if you're willing to share some examples of how your experiences as a professional dancer, as a dance educator, what that looks like in everyday life, how you see some of those SEL competencies that you developed in that way or helped students to develop. How does that still take shape outside of the music classroom or dance classroom in your case?
Sure. When you were asking the question, Kira, I immediately thought of Marcus Garvey Elementary School, which is on the south side of Chicago, in probably one of the roughest areas of Chicago. But when you walk into Marcus Garvey Elementary School, those students, those teachers, the staff members, that community, they speak SEL. So you will see little kindergartners talking about, you know what, I really need to take a moment and go to the peace corner right now because I'm feeling really angry at you taking my toy or you taking that from me. So instead of, they can actually talk to you about, I'm going to go over to the peace corner, I'm going to get the glitter bottle and I'm going to turn it upside down and I'm going to wait for the glitter to come down from the bottle so that I can calm down. They know the coping strategies of how to calm themselves. They know how to contain their excitement so that it's not disruptive to the rest of the school as they're walking through the hallways. The teachers have lessons where if they're reading a book, a literacy lesson, they're stopping and asking the students, well, what did you think the main character, Abigail, what do you think she was feeling when her mom said, no, you can't go to the dance? Have you ever been in that situation? How did that make you feel? Turn to your partner, turn to your elbow partner and discuss that. All of what I just described is SEL. It's not some, pie in the sky out there. I don't know what you're talking about, soft skills, whatever term you want to use that we've heard, to describe SEL. It really is sound pedagogy. It really is about building the community where those students know that we have a culture and a climate in this classroom, in this school, where we're going to talk about our emotions. We're going to be able to identify them. We're going to be able to manage them. And we're going to support each other in the learning process here.
Absolutely. I think you adding that description of what it could look like in locations where you've seen it working really well. And what does that include? It includes, students being able to name what they need and being in touch with that and having had, educators model it so that they can, have the common vocabulary needed to express. Thank you for sharing that.
So we've got a few minutes left, and I know we've got some questions coming in from our attendees. So I'd like to go to the first one is, I would love to hear about a few of your authentic partnerships with families, including details on challenges and successes. So what kind of experiences do you have with developing the partnerships with families?
Sure. As I stated, we have been working with districts for now close to 11 years. And I'm thinking about Denver Public Schools specifically, where they have such a robust out of school time partnership with the schools in that district, where they're really engaging parents to come in and help talk about what is SEL in this school, what does it look like in your home, what cultural implications do we need to discuss and celebrate and support. Denver is a very diverse community. Alaska, same way. I mean, we have so many districts where there's such diversity in the district. Welcoming those parents in, not pushing them away, not expecting them just to be helpers, like, bake the cookies for the field trip tomorrow or chaperone the field trip tomorrow. No, really being partners at the table to talk about what do we hope to see in the graduates from this school district? And in order to get to that graduate, what do we need to do to get there? Let's backwards map from the parents, from the principal, from the custodian, from the music teacher, from the dance teacher. Let's all sit at the table and talk about what it means for this particular school environment. So really thinking about how are we authentically welcoming community partners, families, parents, caregivers to the table to really talk about the design and planning of SEL, the design and planning of SEL and music in this school. That sticks out to me in terms of what does it really look like in welcoming and making sure that students are at the table to talk about how they want to be taught, how they want the classroom to operate. So really being inclusive. I mean, we talk about it, but really thinking about how are we authentically including everyone that needs to be part of the planning process in the school community.
Thank you. Another question that we have comes in. I'm interested in strategies to move administrators from expecting performances and recitals and educators away from teaching technical proficiency versus arts literacy. So I guess it's around how do we work with our administrators to redefine expectations that will include other things besides, oh, there's the performance.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's having open dialogue and making sure that you have students talking about their experience. I think a lot of times adults get in the way. If we really listen to the students about how they're being taught, what they want to learn, the cadence or the frequency of what they're doing, really allowing them to have some voice in how the school or the classroom is going to operate, I think is critically important. And hopefully your administrator, I hope I was that type of administrator, of truly having an open door policy where I would welcome in constructive feedback on what's going to make this instructional process better for both you as an adult, but most importantly for the students. So again, I think making sure that we're listening authentically and clearly and genuinely to the students, because I think they will tell us what they need if we're just open to listening to them and letting them have some say of what's going to happen in the classroom. If they feel like they're having to produce performances too much, I think they will tell you that. And I think that the teachers, the instructors can help be that advocate for them. And I think persistence is critically important. You know, if you have an administrator who's not open the first time, figure out a different way to get that administrator's ear, and employ your parents, employ your students to help make that case. And also, I think showing examples of what you'd like to see in your school, having exemplars to show, maybe take a field trip across the district to see a program that's operating in the way that you would hope.
Good. And we got two more questions that I want to try to squeeze in with the time that we have remaining. This one comes from Bangkok, Thailand. So I guess it's, yes, good morning from Bangkok, Thailand. Could you share experience about introducing SEL to district administrators? You know, what's that process like in being able to have them engage in SEL in general and then get them to understand SEL related to music or arts education?
Great question. So before CASEL will take on a district as a partner, we start with a sit-down meeting with the superintendent. We have no intentions of going into a district to do this in a piecemeal or in pocketed, in a pocketed format where it's over here in this school or in this classroom. So having that support from the very top of making sure that SEL is prioritized is a critical piece for you to become a CASEL partner. And then pretty much what we just did tonight, having that SEL foundations where we're talking about this is what we mean by SEL. Here are the 5 competencies, pretty much what I just did with you all, but of course a more in-depth, comprehensive SEL foundations, if we will, or we call it SEL 101, of making sure they understand what we're talking about, what it looks like in the classroom, what the 5 competencies are, and then how we can start working together so that this really does become a systemic approach, not a piecemeal kind of fragmented process.
And then the final question, and I think this is also going to be for you, Scott. You may want to take a swing at this one. Comes from someone working in the nonprofit area. She says when they start talking about SEL and music, so many people start thinking about this as music therapy. How would you describe the line between music therapy and, musical SEL, or, what is that connecting point?
Absolutely. And the answer is, this is tough. I just put a note in the chat I'm not punting, I'll answer the question, but stay tuned for December because we're actually going to have a music therapist join us who's also a music teacher and going to help us understand what that line looks like. The answer is social and emotional learning is something that's done in the classroom. I tend to think of it as proactive, that we are doing SEL in our space to help build some of these skills and competencies to help students be better prepared for the challenges of life. Our therapist friends are often looking more at a diagnosis, often looking at something that is reactionary to something. And the answer is we need both sides of the equation, but it's very, very important for us to know which side of the equation we're living on. That being said, I do believe that music is therapeutic. I do believe that through our classrooms, we are able to help our students through challenges. But there are certainly things, especially when we're dealing with students who have suffered through profound challenges or might have something that we have not been prepared to address, to realize that there are people out there who are better prepared to help students in that capacity.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And I want to thank Scott and Kira and Urel, as well as a big thank you to Dr. Pamela Garner for kicking off our series. And one thing that I want to reinforce here, because Pamela talked about it, and I just think it's worth reinforcing, and it's something that we talk about in our guide. You know, when we talk about the connection of social emotional learning and music education, we're talking about it being embedded in the curriculum. That it has to be intentional. It's not something that just magically happens by itself. You have to intentionally focus on making that connection. And it has to be sustained. It's not something that you hit and then you run away from randomly. It has to be a sustained effort. So make sure when we're talking about it that it's got to be embedded, it's got to be intentional, and it's got to be sustained. And you're going to hear that over and over and over again over these next the eight remaining sessions that we have in this series. So again, Scott, Kira, Urel, and Pamela, thank you very, very much. And we're going to bring Rebecca back in and she will wrap things up for us tonight.
Thank you, Bob, for a wonderful discussion. Thank you to our audience for being here today. Before you go, we want to take a moment to recognize the recent passing of Dr. Weisberg, who was Dr. Randall's colleague and Castle's Chief Knowledge Officer and Board Vice Chair. We dedicate this webinar to him and his pivotal life's work in social emotional learning. Thank you again for joining us, and good night.